It was just another routine flight, one I had done 100 times before. The hum of the engines, the rhythmic sway of the plane in the sky, it was all so familiar, so calming. The sky stretched out before me, clear and vast, the sun casting a soft glow over the wings. The cabin was peaceful, the crew settled into their usual routines, and everything seemed normal. There was nothing about this flight that hinted at the storm that was about to hit. But then, the call came. It wasn't a call I was expecting. It came through at a strange time, cutting through the calm like a sudden gust of wind. The other end was my boss. "Captain, we need you to land at the nearest airport," he said, his voice sharp and tinged with urgency. "Meet me in the office when you land. There's something we need to discuss." The words were simple, but something in his voice told me this was no ordinary meeting. It wasn't the usual check-in or casual request for paperwork. There was tension in his tone, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. For a moment, the world outside the cockpit seemed to blur. The calm of the flight, the endless sky, all of it suddenly felt ... off. I tried to push it down to focus on flying, but the unease lingered. The rest of the crew didn't seem to notice anything different, but I could feel it, the weight of whatever was waiting for me back on the ground. What had I missed? Why was this call so urgent? The answer wouldn't come to me until later, but I knew, deep down, that nothing would be the same after this. I had worked with the company for 18 years, flying their planes across the country, from coast to coast, through countless sunrises and sunsets. This wasn't just a job, it was my life. The cockpit was my second home, the air my constant companion. I had always been proud to be a part of the team, to be trusted with the responsibility of transporting people safely to their destinations. Every flight was an opportunity to make. Sure, everything went perfectly to prove that all those years of training, all those early mornings and late nights had been worth it, but it was more than just the work. Over the years, I'd formed bonds with the people I worked with, my crew, the ground staff, even the maintenance teams. We weren't just colleagues, we were family. We had been through so much together, weathering storms, dealing with mechanical issues, and navigating the sometimes grueling schedules. We had laughed together, struggled together, and celebrated milestones together. The camaraderie we shared was something rare in any profession, but especially in aviation. We depended on each other, and that trust knowing that we would have each other's backs no matter what was the foundation of our work. That trust was built over years of working side by side, of knowing the rhythm of each person in the cockpit, the way we moved and thought as one. It was a connection forged. Through the highs and lows of the job, I had never questioned it. I had never doubted that the company valued me, that they understood what I brought to the table. My loyalty was unquestioned, my dedication unwavering. Every day I put in everything I had because it felt like the company, my team, was my family. But looking back now, I see that something had started to shift, even if I hadn't noticed it at the time. Something had changed beneath the surface. Still, I believed in the team, believed in the work we did, and I trusted that the company saw me as a part of that family. So I thought. In the weeks leading up to that call, I started to feel something. Changing, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. It was subtle, like a faint breeze that suddenly becomes a gust without you noticing. There were whispers around the office, hushed conversations that seemed to pop up more and more. Words like restructuring, new policies, and cost-cutting measures started to float around, laced with uncertainty. But no one came out and said it directly. Everyone just kept going through the motions, like we were all pretending. Nothing was wrong. Still, I could feel the shift. There was a growing tension in the air, small but undeniable. The hours were getting longer. There was a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. The workload was piling up, and there seemed to be fewer resources available to handle it. The company was pushing harder, faster, but there wasn't much support coming from above. It felt like we were being stretched thinner with little regard for how much longer we could keep it together. And then there was the increasing pressure. I'd always known this job came with its challenges, but this felt different. It wasn't just about meeting standards anymore. It was about constantly delivering, without a second thought to the people behind the tasks. The crew started to feel it too. I could see the weariness in their eyes, the fatigue starting to show. But no one said anything. We're all used to the grind, used to pushing through. I tried to brush it off, telling myself this was just another bump in the road. We had been through tough times before, right? We had weathered the storms together, both literal and metaphorical. So maybe this was just another challenge, something we'd work through like we always did. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the workload. It was the underlying tension, the unspoken changes happening around us, but I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just part of the ebb and flow of the industry. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just stressed. But as the days went by, I started to feel a growing sense of unease, like the calm before a storm that I couldn't see but knew was coming. When I walked into that office, I had no idea what was coming. I expected the usual check-in, maybe. A conversation about the latest schedules or upcoming flights, but nothing could have prepared me for the words that came next. "We're letting you go," my boss said, his voice flat and detached. There was no warmth, no hesitation, just cold, hard finality. Too many expenses, too many inefficiencies. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, each syllable piercing through the shock that was already beginning to take hold. I felt the ground beneath me shift, like I was suddenly standing on unstable ground. The years of hard work, of dedication, of giving everything to the company, none of it mattered in that moment. 18 years of loyalty and service were reduced to nothing more than a budget line. I couldn't breathe. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach, the weight of it threatening to crush me. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis, and I was the only one who had fallen. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had worked so hard to build, suddenly meant nothing. I had been just another cog in the machine, and now that machine had decided I was expendable. There was no anger in his tone, no regret. It was as if I was just another number in a spreadsheet, another expense to be cut. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold and distant. There was no empathy, no understanding of what this meant for me. Just business. I wanted to say something, anything, to make him understand the depth of what was happening. But the words caught in my throat. How could I explain that this wasn't just a job to me? How could I make him see that I had given my life to this company, only to be discarded in a single sentence? But I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. I left that office with nothing but my flight jacket and a small box of personal items. The door clicked shut behind me, and suddenly the silence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. There was no fanfare, no last goodbye, just the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. It was surreal, like I was floating through a dream I couldn't wake up from. How could I go from being the captain of the flight crew, someone trusted to navigate the skies, to this? I had dedicated my life to this company, to flying those planes, to the endless hours spent in the air, ensuring everything ran smoothly, making sure people reached their destinations safely. But now, it was all gone. Just like that. In a single conversation, everything I had worked for, everything I had invested in, was reduced to nothing. The feeling of it, the loss, hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. I stood there, holding that box in my hands, and for the first time, I didn't know who I was anymore. My identity had been so tied to that job, to the work, to the people I had spent years with. And now I was just ... empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked down to see calls from the crew. They were probably wondering where I was, what had happened. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't sure what to say. What could I say? Hey, I just got fired. The thought of explaining it to them, of telling them that I was no longer part of their world, made everything hurt even more. I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing the life I had built around it. I was losing the team that had become my second family, the people who knew me better than anyone else. And the thought of walking away from that forever felt like I was losing a piece of myself. so I let the phone ring, let it buzz and vibrate against the silence of my world. I didn't have the strength to pick it up. Not yet. That night, I found myself sitting in my car, parked outside the airport. The lights from the terminal flickered in the distance, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white, but my mind was miles away. It wasn't the airport I was focused on. It was everything that had just happened. Everything that had just shattered in front of me. I had given 18 years to this company, 18 years of flying, of working side by side with a crew that had become more than just coworkers. They were my family. We had built something together, something meaningful. And now, it was all gone in an instant. Just like that, I had been dismissed. My entire career reduced to a few words and a box of personal items. The anger surged first, like a fire burning inside of me. Anger at the company, at my boss, at myself for not seeing it coming. How could they just throw me away like that? How could they destroy everything we had built together without a second thought? I wanted to scream, to hit something, anything to release the rage that was boiling over, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, like there was something stuck in there, stopping me from saying anything that could make this real. And then the tears came. Uninvited, unexpected, flooding my eyes before I could stop them. The car felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of everything I couldn't change. I had always prided myself on staying composed, on being the one who kept it together, no matter the situation. But tonight, there was no holding it in anymore. I let the tears fall, one after another, without shame or control. I had never felt so powerless. All the years of hard work, all the sacrifices I had made, and for what? To be discarded like a number on a ledger? The pain was unbearable, and no amount of logic or reasoning could stop it. I felt like I was falling apart, like all the strength I had built up over the years had just crumbled to dust. I sat there in that car for what felt like hours, drowning in my own grief and disbelief, unable to escape the reality that everything had changed. The next morning, I woke up in an empty house. It's the familiar surroundings. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft light filtering through the blinds felt alien now. I had been so used to the rhythm of life that revolved around the job, the travel, the constant movement. But now, everything felt still, like I was stuck in the pause button of my own life. The silence that greeted me felt even louder than before, echoing in every corner of the room. It was a silence I had never known, and it was suffocating. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up here. The last time I had been home, I still had a job. I still had a purpose. But now, it was all gone. I had no idea what my next move would be. Should I start looking for another job? Should I take a break? I had no answers. Just a vast, empty space. Where certainty used to be, the company that had been my life for nearly 2 decades was no longer my home. I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was walking away from an entire chapter of who I was. The identity I had built around that job, the person I had become through years of dedication and commitment, no longer had a place in this world. Everything I had poured myself into felt irrelevant now, like it had been erased in the blink of... And it wasn't just the loss of the job, it was the loss of a part of myself that I wasn't sure how to get back. I had built my world around this work, this team, and now it felt like I had no foundation left to stand on. The person I had been before this job was a distant memory. I didn't know who I was without it. As I got up and walked through the house, I realized I was more alone than I had ever felt before. The emptiness wasn't just in the house, it was inside me. There was no one left to lean on, no familiar routine to hold on to. I was left with the raw reality of my situation. I was adrift, uncertain, and isolated. I couldn't let it go without at least trying to understand. I needed closure, something that would make sense of all the chaos. Something to explain how everything I had worked for could be wiped away in an instant. So I made the decision to show up at the office. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I had to face him. I had to look him in the eyes and ask why. I needed to hear it directly from him. When I walked into the office, everything felt different. The space that had once felt like home, a place where I had spent countless hours now, felt cold and foreign. The walls seemed to close in, and the sterile air made the whole situation feel even more suffocating. And there he was, sitting at his desk. It's the same desk where I had sat across from him for years, but this time it was different. His posture was rigid, his eyes distant, and he barely looked up as I walked in. I stood there, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement, something human in his gaze. But there was nothing. He didn't look like the man I had worked with for all these years. He looked like a stranger, a figure who had already decided that my value didn't matter anymore. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, his voice flat, as though I was just another inconvenience to him. I tried to find my voice, to find the words that would explain how betrayed I felt. I had given everything to this company, and now I was just gone. I needed him to understand that this wasn't just business to me. But when the words finally came out, they felt empty, hollow. "I just don't understand," I said, my voice shaking despite myself. "After everything I've done, after all these years, how could you just let me go?" He paused for a moment, his gaze unwavering, and then with a shrug he replied, "It's a business decision, nothing personal." The words hit me like a slap to the face. Nothing personal. All of it, everything I had worked for, reduced to a cold, indifferent business decision. My loyalty, my dedication, my years of service, they meant nothing. The realization was brutal. I wanted to scream.
Ow!
I wanted to ask him how he could live with himself, knowing what he had just done, how he could be so detached from the lives he was impacting. But I didn't. I couldn't. The anger I felt was suffocating, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, watching him dismiss me like I was just another problem to be solved. It wasn't personal. And in that moment, I realized it never had been. The recovery wasn't instant. It wasn't something that happened overnight or in a week. It took time, more time than I wanted to admit. I had always thought that if something like this ever happened, I'd be able to bounce back quickly, that I could just pick myself up and keep moving forward. But it wasn't that simple. The job had been more than just a job. It had been my identity. Losing it was like losing a part of myself. At first, everything felt like a blur. I wandered through the days, trying to make sense of the silence, trying to fill the emptiness with anything that would make me feel whole again. But it was like trying to put together a broken puzzle with missing pieces. I realized that if I wanted to heal, I had to start somewhere. So, I began by taking small steps. I reached out to friends and family, people I had neglected during the years of non-stop work. I hadn't realized how much I had distanced myself from them until I was suddenly alone. I started picking up the phone, making plans to meet, and listening to what they had been through while I had been so absorbed in my own world. I wasn't expecting it to fix everything, but it helped. The conversations, the laughter, simple act of connecting with people who cared about MIT reminded me that I wasn't defined by my job. There were people in my life who saw me for who I truly was, not just the title I carried or the work I did. I also started focusing on myself. I hadn't had time for self-care, for my own well-being in years. Now, I had the space to rediscover who I was when I wasn't tied to a desk or an airport or a flight schedule. I went for walks, started reading books I had long forgotten about, and even took up new hobbies I'd once been curious about. Slowly, I learned how to be okay without the job that had defined me for so long. It wasn't easy. And there were days when I felt like I was falling backward, but with each passing day, I found more strength. I realized that I wasn't weak for feeling lost or unsure. It was human, and it was okay to take time to heal. I wasn't the same person I had been before this all happened, but that wasn't a bad thing. I was becoming someone new, stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the things that truly mattered. Looking back, I realized that being fired wasn't the end. It was the beginning. At first, it felt like everything was falling apart. It felt like I had lost everything I had worked for, like my identity had been taken from me without warning. But now, with time and perspective, I see that it wasn't the end of my story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter. One I had never imagined, but one I needed to write. I wasn't wrong for dedicating my life to something I believed in. I wasn't wrong for trying to make a difference, for doing everything I could to be the best in my field. These years I spent working, flying those planes, building relationships with the crew. They were real, and they meant something. I gave everything I had, and that wasn't a mistake. But now, I understand that I don't need to be defined by that company or that role. I'm more than that job, more than any title or position. I'm someone with strength, resilience, and a future ahead of me that isn't tied to anything or anyone from my past. This experience has shown me that I am capable of much more than I thought. I've learned that I don't need to rely on a single thing, a single company, to determine my worth. I can reinvent myself, I can grow, and I can adapt. I'm not angry anymore. The frustration and bitterness have faded, replaced by a quiet sense of freedom. Freedom from a job that defined me for so long, freedom to explore new paths, and freedom to live life on my own terms. And as I move forward, I know this experience has only made me stronger. I have been tested in ways I never expected, but I've come out the other side more aware of my own strength and resilience. I don't regret the years I spent with that company, but I don't need it to validate me anymore. I'm free now, and that's more powerful than anything else. The future is wide open, and I'm walking into it with the confidence that comes from knowing I can handle whatever comes next.